They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking,
hi, this is Nico. You're listening to my dad Rafal, also known as the White Rabbit, and James Jardine on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Buckle up and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations. It's blood, think back to the last time that we were happy.
Oh man, I gotta tell you, I love that intro music so much. I say this every time. I mean, every time I listen to it, I like it more. I've had that intro song since the beginning almost, and it is pretty fantastic. All right, let's not waste any time. This is part 2 of 3 of this episode with Bo, where we're talking about risk-focused security programs and how to do the thing. Now, in this episode, we are going to give you some insight into what to measure, how to measure it, what makes sense, and that all-important storytelling aspect of what you do. I'm going to kick it over to Bo. Because you guys already know who he is, assuming you're not catching this in the middle, but if you are, that's Bo, that's me. We're going to roll. Hit your slides and let's go. Dun, dun, dun. Here we go. Take it away, partner.
Rafal, thank you for this opportunity. I get pretty excited. As a quick reminder for everyone, what we're talking about is how to go from, we're tackling the whole issue that people think compliance can't help you. And I'm telling you, compliance can get you security and it can justify your budget. Last week, last episode, we gave the introduction. This time we're focusing on the metrics that actually tell the story. And if compliance isn't what resonates with you, the threat can do that to you. You can get to this through multiple things, and I'll go through that in the next podcast, but metrics matter. And if you choose the wrong ones, you're going to lose credibility, or you're just going to waste time because you're tracking the wrong stuff. And if you waste 6 months tracking something and realize that's not what you're looking for, you just wasted 6 months. So we're going to go through these today. And I'm really looking forward to having a little back and forth with Rafal, because this is stuff where we all struggle with these. Metrics matter. And when you start with what are you looking for, depending on your industry, you're either going to have regulatory compliance, or you're going to have contractual requirements, or you're going to have service level agreements. You're going to have something that makes your business money. You have to find out what it is that is required at a level that your business either has a regulatory requirement to do that, a contractual obligation to do that. These are the things that are foundational and resonate very easily with senior leaders. When you understand what those tasks are, be it, making sure an application is available, making sure that data is secure, making sure, that's one's pretty common everywhere, making sure the services are made available. Whatever your requirements are, and I said this last time, and I want to hammer this in, no contractor, no consultant is going to be able to tell you what those things are. They can ask really smart questions and you can pay them a lot of money so that maybe they'll be able to do it in 2 weeks. But at the end of the time, your network. You have to understand what those single points of failures are, what those critical items will ensure that you can meet your obligations wherever they come from. And when you're talking to your leadership, when you're talking about obligations, that's different than this black hole of security. This is, we have a contract worth so much money, maybe it's 10% of your total invoices for the year or something. That is going to resonate with them when, to maintain that contract, we have to demonstrate this, or we told them we're going to do this. These are things that will resonate when you're actually looking at what are the metrics I need to track. Now, you're not going to go in the business units, do their job for them and tell them, how quickly are we getting parts delivered? That's not what you're tracking. You're tracking, how do I make sure that we get those parts delivered? What are the security tools that are essential for those parts to be delivered, or those applications to be public, to be kept up, or the data to be kept safe? You need to start with, and I know this is a chicken and egg thing, but you need to really start with what are your crown jewels? What are the things that have to be done so that you can maintain your contracts? And most importantly, gain new ones, because if you're not growing, you're dying. You got to have new business, because all contracts come to an end sometime. So you have to be working on impressing the next customer and not just only keeping your current customers happy, even though you can't ever forget that. And that's why I'm a big believer in connecting compliance to security. One thing that frustrates me is how many people assume compliance means a screen capture. If all you're doing is screen captures and you're expecting your customers, your auditors, or anyone else to be impressed that, hey, look, I put the registry setting from 0 to 1, so now FIPS encryption is on my workstations. Ooh, I'm awesome. That's not what compliance is about. We have to throw out terms that are kind of, it's a $5 word, but when you talk about continuous compliance, you really have to, if you look at compliance as continuous, then you actually get towards security. And if you look at what's necessary to maintain continuous compliance that gives you security, now you're starting to get to those metrics that you need to be collecting to actually get you there. And then one thing that's critical is that once you figure out what those metrics are, you got to figure out how to collect those metrics. It's not all, you want something, obviously you want something automated, but if not, you have to figure out some way to make sure you have no visibility gaps. And there are very few networks that are so mature that when you're going through this process from the beginning, that you're going to not find out you have some visibility gaps on these metrics you're looking for. Now, maybe you're super mature and you have no visibility gaps, and then I'm really happy for you. But most people will say this is going to take some time, so that you will be spending sometimes up to 18 months to figure out what those key metrics are and making sure you're actually getting the information, so that if, for example, one of your key metrics is the ability to remediate vulnerabilities in a public-facing server within 2 weeks, I don't know, whatever it is that your key metric you're driving toward, you need to make sure that you can actually identify all of your public-facing servers, because nothing is worse than you telling leadership, we're not affected by name your big thing that's just happened, right? There's been several for Microsoft and some other big companies out there that have some pretty famous ones lately. And you're like, oh, we don't even have that system. And then you find out you did, and it got hacked. Then you're probably going to be really wishing you spent a little more time on configuring your tools to actually make sure you're capturing the metrics. Visibility is a key metric, making sure you know what things are. And if you're one of the stress tests on these will always occur with, are the people turning their head 45 degrees trying to figure out, why do I care about that metric? Now, if you can explain to them in one sentence why that metric matters, I would recommend continuing to utilize that metric. If you're having to do 5 to 10 minutes to explain why this metric matters, maybe you want to optimize it further to get with your leadership. Because at the end of the day, if they think it's a meaningful metric and we're not performing well against it, that leads to conversations about resource allocation. So that's where you want to be. And that's one of the things that I need to emphasize, that nothing will get you in more trouble as an InfoSec person than glossing over stuff and telling people what they want to hear. That's not going to help you. That might help you get, in the short term, that might maybe even give you a promotion. I don't know, if you tell people what they want to hear, but at some point, that is going to hurt your credibility. And nothing hurts your credibility more than being a BSer, or excuse me, being someone who is telling people what they want to hear and not the truth. And
yeah, I'll agree with you right there, 100%. We've all worked with those people that never seem to have any red on their reporting metrics or on their scorecards, and you sort of at first you wonder, wow, those people must be awesome, and over time you just realize, wow, those people are really, really crappy liars. And those are the ones that nobody takes seriously, because look, if you're going to report, I think it's important to note that we all have, every business unit, every organization has something they need to work on. There are no perfectionists out there, right? And so being, they say admittance is the first step to recovery, and knowing you have, G.I. Joe taught me, right? Knowing is half the battle when I was a kid. And your business has to know that it has problems. And I know some people are going to say, yeah, but I've told them and they don't care. I'm telling you, you probably haven't used Bose method here, because they probably will care if you put it in the right context. Sorry, I had to throw that in because it rings in my head when you say that every time.
No, I'm really glad you pulled that thread, because when you're looking at these metrics, you will actually gain credibility. This is firsthand knowledge if you come in and show this is where we are. And then, because you know what? Time is continuous. You're going to make progress. And if you're giving them the honest thing and showing progress, you're going to get results. Results lead to resources. So, and that's really important, because if you're showing them that everything's fine when it's not only are you lying to them, but you're only making things worse, because you're not going to get any resources to fix it. So that you're part of the problem, and honesty will help you. Now, there's not any metric that, I can't give you Bo's 60 metrics that all apply to you. However, I will start off by saying these are 4 types of metrics that apply to almost every company, because it is a technical limitation. If it is an end-of-life software, they're not making new patches for it. You cannot do vulnerability remediation on an end-of-life system. At the end of the day, that's something that leadership will understand, why end-of-life matters. In one sentence, you can explain, like technical debt, you can use that term, and people will get that. When you talk about training, that resonates with almost every leader, because training, you can't expect people to protect the company like from social engineering if you don't train them on that. And if the company spends money on getting really good training on how to, defeat social engineering, and people aren't taking the training, leadership will have buy-in on fixing that. I've personally sent emails to people saying, hey, I've noticed you're a little overdue on this training. Please take some time to do it, because it's helping us to protect the company. This is something that I actually share, how many times people have reported phishing emails that made it past our security stack, and how we praise them, and how that this training will help you be part of that solution. And whether that's, someone doing it every couple of hours because your security stack has holes in it, or it's maybe once a week or once a month, that training might be critical to keep the company from having, not InfoSec, the company having a really bad day. That resonates with people, and leadership likes to see 95, 96, 98% training. They understand there's always going to be a couple people, but when you're looking for numbers, end of life, they want to see where they're at, and that's where those tiers come in. End of life software and public facing systems, that's always red. I don't care what company you're in, because if it's public facing and you're putting a 2003 server public facing, that is a concern in any industry. If you're, go ahead, Rafal. I know you want to interrupt.
It's killing me to interrupt you, but we all know that one vendor that had that end of life file sharing application that was probably on everybody's radar going back 6, 7, 8 years, and it's been end of life. But you know what? It's not broken. The vendor still has it online, and man, we've already paid for it. We've got stuff that uses it. We'll fix it next year. And then enroll the breaches from this, one after another, after another, after a dozen more, after a dozen more. And as soon, hundreds of companies, potentially thousands, are impacted by one EOL piece of software that a whole bunch of companies were using. That hammers that point home. End of life is the bane of so many cybersecurity folks' existence. It's kind of scary.
And then one thing that I would advocate to people, put vulnerabilities always in context. You can normalize them by host, and that will get you a lot more credibility if you're looking, instead of saying we have 1 million vulnerabilities in our network, or whatever your number is in your network. And I'm sure those numbers can be anywhere from 1 to 100 million, depending on the size of your network and how much end-of-life software you have and just how mature your vulnerability management program is. That's not really practical metrics. Metrics that actually show that on our public-facing systems, we average 15 critical and high vulnerabilities that are open right now. That's something that you can have a conversation about and actually translate vulnerabilities into remediation actions. Because once you get to remediation actions, then you can prioritize those remediation actions through a change control process. And that's where I was talking in the previous call about how whenever you have technical debt, it's going to create process debt and people debt. because as you get rid of the technical debt, you're not going to have to do more processes to now patch them and more people to actually do the work. So this is something you have to be aware of, and you have to prepare for it, and you have to capture that. Like, that we didn't need many people when we weren't patching our systems. That's, it makes it, our IT folks were maxed out and they're not patching the systems. So you have to figure out processes to actually either automate as much as possible, normalize in other ways. And we'll talk about that and how some success stories I have on that. But vulnerabilities per host easily talks about how do we get to change control? Because that is something we can address when you look at it that way, because it's 2 steps and you get to a change control process. And I hope every company has some kind of change control process, because unless you're a home office, you have to have some deliberation before you actually start making changes to production servers and a production environment. Last thing that I really find that it transcends every industry is if your company spends money to buy security tools, there is resonance with senior leaders to make sure that they're deployed. The biggest horror story I've seen are the companies that had the security tools, but they weren't deployed on the systems that got hacked that caused really bad days. So that a metric that actually tracks that deployment, and I've seen numbers vary from industry, but personal experience, I've seen that you can automate up to a certain number, and then when you hit that number, it's not, to use a colloquialism, the juice may not be worth the squeeze, because depending on the scale of your environment, let's say you're at 98%, but your environment, that last 2% is maybe 200 systems. Those 200 systems, and you have one person who can do this, a person's having to remote into each one of those 200. You might not justify going into those last 2% to get that when it's going to take Billy, Sally, Jimmy a week to do those systems. And oh, by the way, when the next iteration of your security tool gets updated, they're going to have to do it again. You will, over time, and that's one of the key things on metrics, this will actually, picture will become pretty clear to you as you track them. Metrics are not instantaneous. Metrics trend. And as you find trends, you don't have to take my word for it, because your company might be at 96%. That's where the automation fails you. I know that some large companies have actually gotten to 99.3%. They actually, because I've talked to a company that had literally 1 million endpoints, and to get above 99.3 was unsustainable. So they were working with the vendor to try to figure out how to make their tool more deployable. Even though the vendor's like, dude, that's 99.3%. They're like, but yeah, that's still leaving us with like 15,000 endpoints that aren't getting the tool updates. So that's why
interesting.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, Bo, that's such an interesting point to stop for a second and reflect on, because back many, many years ago, when I worked for a very large company, when we were deploying antivirus, for example, or updating signatures, those kinds of things, 85, it was 80% at first, 85% was considered like, all right, good enough. We've done the best we could. And with the connectedness of systems now, with the fact that, as many people will say, bad actors need just to find one weakness, and odds are they can make their way from there. Okay, I can see how 85% would not be enough. But 85% or 98% of what? On a network of 100 hosts, okay, that's too easily vulnerable. On a network of 10,000 hosts, ooh, that's a much bigger number. On a network of, like I was on, 1.5 million hosts, ooh, that's in today's threat calculus, that's really bad. But knowing what you can achieve, and I think that the point that I want to leave folks with is, it's usually, I think of it as like this reverse hockey stick curve, where the first dollar you spend makes a huge impact. Then if you're in the next 1,000 are big impacts, and then you get to a point where like $1 million moves the needle just a tiny bit, and you have to ask yourself, am I spending this money wisely by adding 0.5% to the total deployment number? Is it worth this tremendous cost that it's going to take me, or can I put that in a different bucket? And I know you cover this a little bit later, but this is important. Coverage is such a pivotal metric, and it can be seen in a number of different ways. I think it's worth covering, and I think it's worth thinking about quite a bit more. In fact, Bo, I think we could probably do an entirely separate podcast on philosophy of coverage and costs and that inverse hockey stick curve. But anyway, I wanted to share that because it's something that I remember spending a lot of time on before, and I'm pretty sure it's going to come back and around a couple of times again.
Well, I would offer this, Rafal. What you're asking is why it's a common metric across industry, and it's something that senior leaders will glom in on, because this is where you have the conversation with those one, maybe two sentences. 98% comes out to 200 systems, maybe whatever it is, and you explain to leadership, and here's why. Some of those are not plugged in, or some of them are on a desk, or some of them are in a test environment, whatever the scenario is. And you have that conversation, and it gets to. I'm a big fan of Paul Proctor. I've talked to him many times. He uses the term service level agreements. I don't use that myself, but I get what he's talking about, and that's where you can start talking about to senior leaders. Get to 98%. If you want me to get to 99, we're either going to have to buy a much more expensive tool for deployment, or we're going to frankly have to get more people, because I can't just automate it and I can't just process it. I'm now looking at people. And I think that's where the risk-informed decisions come in. And Rafal, like you said, the juice ain't worth the squeeze, but it's transparent. And how do you know it's transparent? Because you're showing it to senior leaders. It's not hidden somewhere. And this chart right here is something that took me 18 months to put together, and it was rolled out incrementally. And I'm not trying to convince anyone to use my metrics. I'm saying these are metrics that over 18 months, I've been able to tell a story that actually helps us explain to senior leaders. These metrics go to the board, they go to the executive leadership team, and they go to the people doing the work. This is something I put out a monthly report that actually tracks the metrics and actually tells the story. And this actually helps us convey the value of our investments, because they know how much they're spending on InfoSec, and they want to see, or is there a lot of red there? And I'm not at all saying that they give you a lot of money, you need to be green. That's not what I'm saying, but they want to see change. And that's why I believe every metric should be having a delta column. I put, the Greek symbol for delta, which, change, in every one of my metrics for that reason, because leadership understands Rome wasn't built in a day, but leadership doesn't understand why you needed a $500,000 tool last year that you still haven't got deployed. That doesn't make sense to them.
That's right.
It's like, if you needed it so bad last year, why is it 12 months later not deployed? So then you need to be talking, and you need to be transparent, like telling them, well, I have two engineers, or hey, you're like, I'm a small company, I don't even have engineers. I have an IT guy that's trying to figure out how to do this with professional services. Whatever your example is, but those are, to go to Paul Proctor's terms, service level agreement kind of concepts, or in my terms, those are risks that you are accepting, right? At the most fundamental level, you can spend money, but as I talked about in the first portion of this podcast, it all ties together. If you don't, you can spend the money, but if you don't have the people doing the work and the end users invested in supporting the capability, because every company has smart users and they can figure out how to go around security. So if they're not invested in not trying to bypass security, and if the IT folks aren't invested in trying to get their systems patched, get tools deployed, your metrics are going to show that, because you're going to have the issues, as I like to say, they will just not change, and they will just sit there. It will just percolate and
stagnate.
Yes, and the board will notice that. Yes, I see there's no heartbeat. That line hasn't changed in 12 months. Okay, what's going on? Why hasn't that item closed?
Hey,
so
Bo, do me a favor. Walk us through this, because I love these. And as you walk us through these, and just, you don't have to hit every one of them, but talk us through these. Talk me through, particularly for me, and I'm thinking probably the same thing many folks listening and watching this are thinking, why did you pick these? What is the story you're telling? Walk me through this, because this is fascinating.
The first one on the top left is contractual obligations. That is something that the senior leaders care about. We're a defense contractor, so we have to report a score into the DoD it's called the Supplier Performance Risk Systems, SPRS, commonly referred to as SPRS, that actually addresses how are we aligned with their security requirements they put into their contracts. And you have to put a score in there so that I then have, and that's what's in parentheses. For in my industry, that score is based on a 110 baseline. So if
Okay.
you're 105, 110, you can be negative 225. Actually, that's actually a possible score. But
Wow.
you will have on there, and this one's yellow in this example because there's open plans of action and milestones, or actions, that controls that aren't implemented either fully or just completely not enforced. So that there's open ones, and there might also be ones that are nuanced from different sources. Like I also have on there for ISO 27001 if we have poem items for there, because those are things where we can lose our certification. And that certification is not a contractual requirement for us, but it is an absolute force enabler, because we get asked I do a lot of security questionnaires in my role. We get
I can
asked,
imagine.
do you have any are you ISO 27001? Yes, we are. You'd be surprised how much grace that gets us, because there's a lot of companies. Frankly, there's like 2,000 companies in the U.S. that have ISO 27001. We are one of those 2,000. So
Okay.
that helps. So showing POEM items there, senior leaders understand plans of action and milestones says you're not fully compliant. So they take that as an important. That's why it's top row. We just talked about how important tool average is. That's why it's top row, because a tool average will tell you how visible is my network. Because if I don't have an endpoint detection or reporting tool, I mean, generally, and this is definitely another longer conversation, but when you're talking about tools, you're looking at fundamentally you want endpoint detection response. You need some kind of correlation tool, and I'm a big fan of having some kind of network detection and response tool. You need something to look at, you get that, you've got your triad covered, and you can actually do stuff. Maybe you also have some data loss prevention tools. There's a lot of tools you can put on there, but you and your leadership has basically invested you with the resources to do that, and now it's your job to deploy it. That's why it's a top row. One of the things that concerns everyone is unpatched vulnerabilities. The biggest thing on unpatched vulnerabilities is technical debt. And what this looks at is that technical debt from different, I slice it different ways. I look at workstations, servers, infrastructure, and applications. And the reason those matter is because each one of them has a different story. And my leadership understands through time why technical debt might be accepted in some areas, why it's yellow versus technical debt of one server 2003 in the DMZ that's public facing pushing a service would push this red, where maybe 10% in our internal network is amber and we're working to improve it, right? And these numbers are notional because that's what we're sharing, right? And then you care about switches because anyone that's been around knows that he that owns a router owns the network. He that owns a switch rules the world, right? So that you want to make sure that they're not easily exploited devices. And end of life applications, you just gave a story a few minutes ago about one that caused a whole lot of heartburn. So you look at not only that they exist, but are they public facing? So that's why that's there. And then the last one on there, we as a defense contractor have to report if certain incidents occur, not only to the defense, but like we actually have contracts with they have to report through to the Food and Drug Administration, or name your different reporting avenues, cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency, name who you have to report to, the SEC, Security and Exchange Commission, so that we track in the last 12 months, how many times have we had to do that? That is one that's top shelf because leaders, those are ones that they leave a mark when those kind of things happen, and you work through those. Now, to speed up a little on the second row, I'm a big proponent of having some kind of third-party public scan of your network. There's at least 3 big companies out there. I'm not going to recommend one, but there's at least 3 of them. You might be able to guess by looking at the slide one that I like, but there's 3 out there that I would recommend anybody use. Those are 3 of good ones. But getting what their score shows of you is it gives senior leaders and your customers unbiased information. Something as an ISO 27001 audit, something as a DoD audit, an FDA audit, when you get a third-party audit, and this is one that you can actually, and this is something we actually do show, we show our leadership where we compare next to our competitors or to our parent company. We actually put that information out there to give context to where, showing the power of their investments and how that is reflected in our security. It's one step to get from low low public, when you get a really bad score from some public scanner, that is going to lead to bad things. Next one, we have a tool that we really like that does an identity risk score. That helps us with, we're big fans of the concept of user entity behavior analytics.
Yeah.
We think you can do that through multiple tools. We have one tool that does really well on the user side, and we have another tool that we like for the entity behavior, the network traffic. And you bring that together, you actually you can't lie. There's going to be something happening that's going to be picked up, even when you're talking about the scary threats, the advanced persistent threats. There's going to be some traffic on the network, or there's going to be some change of activity by Billy, Sally, either weird logins, talking to systems Billy doesn't usually talk to. There's going to be stuff that'll pop out, so we track that. And then going a little faster, the number of vulnerabilities, I hit this earlier. You care about where they are, workstation servers, DMZ, and then how many percentage of auto patch, because maybe you're still on the journey. Show change, because auto patch gives an additional assurance that if it's automated patching, that it's going to happen. If you're InfoSec, you got to be talking about mean time to respond and mean time to close. That's just InfoSec. If you're actually, you have some kind of correlation to some way of tracking what's going on in your network, you need to be, that's something that every InfoSec team should be thinking about.
You've got an entire column, an entire row now dedicated to phishing. And does that tell me what I think it tells me, that you really are a firm believer that the way into an organization, especially these days, is through the end user, and you guys are very carefully tracking that?
I track a lot of the big Intel reports, right? And all of them agree that, there's the changes year by year a little. Like I think in 2023, it was either 2022, it was 2022, I'm sorry. In 2022, we saw more stuff trying to get in through the perimeter than we had in 2021. But what is persistent throughout, users are the most important asset in your network, because they're the ones that are generating revenue, but they are also the most targeted. So that we have to enable them through training, and we have to enable them through getting the security stack on their endpoint. These are things we as InfoSec owe our users so that they can protect the company. And I actually have on there a metric on I call them saves. It's my military background, that they're going in every time that they report something, they made it through our security stack. I celebrate it. And I'm really excited because I will share that the numbers have been going down because our security tools are being better optimized. So less stuff is getting through. Does that make sense? Because you could also say maybe maybe you're not picking it up. No, we're monitoring it pretty closely. Our security tools are being better tuned. They're picking up more stuff. So even though the number of stuff being reported is going down, it's a good news story because they're reporting on a smaller stuff getting through. So that you celebrate those, and we actually give, we call them bonus Bravo points to people that actually report that, now we get a lot of people reporting spam. We don't give them bonus points for those, but when people actually catch phishing, not only do we celebrate them, we will use those as phishing campaigns, because those are the kind of things that got through our security. It's not always one for one, but we absolutely, and this is something where we have built trust with our company, our phishing campaigns are never gotchas. People know that we're getting stuff that has either gone through our security stack or it is going widespread through the internet. And this is something we need to be looking for. And we have real stories of people actually saying the training helped them see something, like that actually helped them. And that matters, because training, if they take it as like it's punishment, you're in a bad place. If people see that they're actually protecting the company, and they are, so it's not like there's any misdirection here. When people actually know that they're making a difference, it's something to celebrate. And then the bottom row is basically looking at things like giving the leadership how many, we automate patching for the stuff that's we can automate. What are we looking at each month in the bottom left of things that we couldn't automate? So maybe it's an application that had to be patched. Maybe it's something that's a registry setting that has to be changed. Whatever that thing that is, that's not just going to be done through routine patching, we track those. We track, how good of a job we're doing when people put in tickets for InfoSec. We make it a big deal that we close out our tickets in a timely manner, and all of our tickets are assigned, so they're not just sitting waiting for someone to look at them. We take, because that's part of our contract with our user base, is if they have issues, put in a ticket, it won't just go to the floor. And then the last ones are purely for, these are for money people. Cost per something, workstation, servers, per person, because then you can actually normalize and actually show, hey, if you gave, for the cost of this, which pays for a resource or whatever, or pays for a network detection response tool, like it goes from maybe it's $500 a person to $515 a person for the company. We can now decrease risk. And now that's kind of getting into my next conversation, which I'll be getting into momentarily on the third podcast, about how do I show that for this much of an investment, I can buy down this much risk. And I get really excited because you can do that. And it doesn't take anything that you can't get off the internet to do this. You don't have to go to any class, you don't got to get a degree, and you don't need another certification. And then the bottom one is, it is very important that you are a trustworthy partner to your leadership. If they give you a budget, especially if they give you a budget that meets what you say you need, that you don't overspend it. So that you need to make sure that you're staying on spend. Now, there's some people that that's not InfoSec. No, but this is a dashboard. It's for the senior leaders. And it's for a lot of purposes, but senior leaders want to make sure that you're not overspending. And they want to know that you're trustworthy. So those are the metrics. I went through them pretty quickly, but each one of them tells a story, and they matter in my mind. These actually do show we are improving the security of the company. I can show how we're getting contractual requirements met.
All right, and I'm gonna wrap this one up for you for this slide, because I think when we started talking about, and you showed me some of this is the slide that captured my imagination so well, because to me, when I think of KPIs that CISOs report, I don't often, in fact, I don't think I've ever seen spend versus budget. How much of my budget, how close to on budget am I as a department? What is our cost to protect each of our critical assets at the moment? That's all. Like, this is stuff that makes it concrete and real. It takes cybersecurity, which is something that, I get it, our leaders and our parents and our friends and our kids all hear about on the news. They hear about it in the papers. They hear in publications and wherever. They hear about it, but it doesn't really become concrete. It doesn't make tangible sense until something terrible happens to them, and it's like, oh, some bad guy, some bad hacker somewhere got me. It's like, no, this is more common than you think. But this, for people that make decisions on behalf of the company, is such a powerful set of a way to convey understanding. Powerful set of KPIs that conveys understanding, teaches them and shows them that A, you're aligned, B, that you have that empathy and the ability to understand what they look for and convey your desires and your budget and your actions and needs to them, and that you can convey all of that. Are we doing better? Are we doing worse? They can look at this and go, you know what? This is actually pretty good. I know what I'm looking at. And this is awesome. Folks, if you're watching and listening, these aren't all right for you, but I can virtually guarantee you that spend the budget, cost per, support tickets, urgent actions, some sort of tools average, some sort of that technical debt one. Holy cow. You should have that in your repertoire as a KPI. Sorry, I wanted to just wrap this slide up because it's such a powerful place. Pause this if you want. Take a screenshot. Hell, hit up Mo and he'll one-on-one use some of these things. But this stuff is important and it's powerful and it makes a difference.
Thank you, Rafal. Let me go to the last slide. The last slide, just to wrap it up. This is voice of experience putting these together. Metrics will adapt over time. That took me 18 months to get to those 16. I changed out some. And it was actually, as our team grew over the last 3 years, that we were able to look at other things, because requirements without resources are fantasy. So that we were able to address more as our resources were given to us. We were actually able to show with this extra, say, person, we were now able to address vulnerabilities that we couldn't address before because we didn't have the capacity. And we could actually show that. So it's a message you can show leadership. And I'm not saying start off by making a big board and making everything red, but I'm saying show them where they're at, be honest, show that here's what, where is our state today? And then you build confidence by over time making it better. So and I promise that not only will you build trust, you'll also increase visibility in your network, because it's almost a mathematical certainty that you're going to find blind spots when you're actually trying to do this. You're going to be one of the ones that makes you sick to your stomach is you look on your security tools like, hey, this CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency just sent out this known vulnerability, known exploited vulnerability that affects this server type. And you look in your tool and you're like, well, we don't have that. And then you talk to the admins and they're like, yeah, it's over here. And you're like, oh, I'm sure that never happens to anyone. But hypothetically, if that happens, this is something that because you're tracking the metrics, you're going to start fixing that. Yep. Because no one wants to have that, you spend all this money on security tools and then there's a public facing application you didn't even know existed. No one wants to be there. So that these metrics will help you get there over time. And as we talked about with that number of 98%, 99%, whatever it is for tools, the metrics will help you learn what works and doesn't work, because it is self-critiquing behavior. If it takes you, you spend a whole week and you can't get that extra 1/10 of 1%, and some guy just spent a week of time, you have real data that you can now talk to your boss, to leadership, that, we should mark 98% as green, because, the cost would be this. And if they're like, no, I want it to be red, then okay, boss, you got to give us more resources. Then you can have that honest conversation. And if you come across like, this is where our risk tolerance is now, because this is all the resources you've given us, that's a honest conversation. We know that's a risk tolerance because that's all we have the ability to do. And then
that's right.
Mature your program over time. So I'm really looking forward to the next one, because hopefully all the stuff we're talking about will then really drive in on the third one, how you can actually then start saying, if you give me, let's say, $500,000, I can buy down a $5 million of risk. And you're like, oh, show me your math.
That's going to be the good one. This is great setup, you guys. I hope you've had a chance to put some time and really kind of digesting this and paying attention. But this has been a great setup. And even if you stopped here, this will give you tons of info. But don't. I want you to come back for that third piece. Bo, thank you so much. This is awesome. And we're going to end the second one on this point. And guys, come back for 3, because this is where it all wraps up and puts it in a bow. So, Bo, thank you so much. We'll do 3 shortly. Folks, thank you for listening. Questions, comments, hit us up on LinkedIn. I know Bo's on there. If you have questions, if you want take further action, you want explanations, you have some concerns, you want help, don't hesitate to ask. Because as he said, rising tide floats all boats, and this is why he's doing this, to help everybody else out there that needs this. And he's dedicated his time to putting this together for us. So thanks for part 1 and 2. Part 3 is coming up. Stand by, folks.